We have been preaching through the book of Romans, and this is the third message that I've preached from verses 18 through 32, because it tells about the wrath of God revealed from heaven. And we've talked about how God has revealed himself even in the creation, and how God has shown this truth to us. It is a work within us. And so we have known about this. And those that say they do not know God, it is because they have suppressed this information and have changed their own conscience. They have salved or have hardened their conscience to say that the truth that they know inside, that God is real and that they are accountable to Him. They know that, but they have suppressed that, and their conscience has been hardened, it has been seared, and they would rather believe a lie than the truth. And so when I begin tonight, I will be beginning in verse number 24. Wherefore God also gave them up unto uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Now, before I continue to read, I want to point out that he says he gave them up. Now, you may say, well, I didn't know God gave up. I didn't know God was in a position to where he says, you know what? I've tried and tried and tried, and I just give up. God is not a person that gives up. This is a term and a phrase that has to do with the doctrine of reprobation. Now, I'm pretty sure there's not very many churches in Titusville tonight that's going to preach on the doctrine of reprobation. Now, you may not know what that means. It means this, that there are those whom God has chosen before the foundations of the world. Blessed are they. I'm telling you, many are called, but few are chosen. The path that leads to destruction is broad, but the path that leads to life is narrow. But those who have been passed over, they are the reprobate. Now, I'm sure you've heard of that word, reprobate. It's used usually to insult somebody. Oh, you reprobate. But it really means to pass over, to have been given up. So, Paul repeats this 2 more times. In verse number 26, he says, for this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. And again in verse number 28, he says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. There was a time in this world when all the sin of the world was before the eyes of God, and men always did evil before Him, and God destroyed that world. There was a time when cities were given over to homosexuality, to not taking care of their orphans, and ignoring the widows, but mostly given over to a life of lust and sexual promiscuity. God sent fire from heaven and turned those cities to ash. There was a time when all these things were true, but the conscience of men denies it. They would rather be happy and not face the truth. At what price is this happiness? A few years, and that's all we have, folks, a few years of living without a nagging conscience instead of facing the truth. I'm telling you, you need to face the truth, because God can give you peace with Him. And then you'll begin to know what real happiness is all about. You don't have to live a life of fake happiness, denying the truth. So, this is the doctrine that he is giving us. Paul is telling us that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven, and that men have suppressed the truth and have calloused their consciences, and now God has given them over, and He has passed by them. Paul has said 3 times that he gave them up to an uncleanness, gave them up to vile affections, and he gave them over to a reprobate mind. Now, in verses 29 through 31, Paul lists 22 classes of sin, 22 types of sin. Now, a lot of these sins kind of overlap. We have the unrighteousness of fornication, wickedness, covetousness, and so on. Now, some of these sins kind of overlap. Have you ever had to choose a dessert? And you say, what do you got? Well, I got pie, and I got cobbler, and I got cake. Well, they all have similarities. They're all desserts. And cobbler's a lot like pie, except they didn't put the crust on the bottom. And so a lot of these type of covetousness and envy, these overlap. But the thing about this is that Paul is saying the world who has given themselves over to their lusts have taken these things and have used these things as tools to make them happy. Now go figure. These are the things that makes the world happy, that allows them to achieve what they want. What do they want? Well, they don't want the truth of God, I'll tell you that. Now, out of all these classes of sin, Paul is going to use an illustration of one particular sin. And this particular sin is on center stage today in our society. Right now, the sin of homosexuality is on the center stage of every news broadcast. It is the topic of our Supreme Court. It is in all the schools. It's in all the companies and industry. Many companies are starting up organizations within their companies to have a group of LGBT, we love you group type of we want to accept you, and put up a banner that says you come and tell us that you are and we'll hire you type of organization. Now, with this type of issue going on in our country, I find it sad. I find it sad that Paul should use this sin as an example that God has given men over to their lusts, and they have been passed by. Now, why do you think he is using the sin of homosexuality as the primary example? And before I go on with my explanation, I would like to read these verses to you. Wherefore God gave them up unto uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. You see, he's going right into the sin of homosexuality, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever and ever. Amen. And for this cause he gave them up to vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use of that which is against nature. Lesbians. He said, even the women and the men, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet or appropriate. Now, I want you to recall what I said concerning how the nature of sinful man suppresses the truth, and that there is a natural revealing of right and wrong within a man because God has put it there, and it has to do with man and woman. There is a natural bond and union because God made man male and female. And yet, the lusts of men will deny the natural understanding that everyone is born with to live a life that is it's overcome with lust. And they will not be under the normal boundaries. You know, everyone who is, shall we say, well, I can't say everyone, because some people have that gift of being single. Now, some people have the gift of needing to be married. They're both gifts. They're just different gifts. I like being married. I like my gift. You know? And when I am married, you know, when I have there's a certain, if I lived beyond those boundaries, then I'd have a problem. You see, God has made many things with boundaries. Now, for example, is it wrong to love yourself? Is it wrong to love yourself? Well, let me put it this way. God says, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, I don't have to love my neighbor. I can hate my neighbor because I hate myself. No, that's not how it works. We love ourselves. Therefore, love your neighbor as yourself. But if you loved yourself to the point where you would kill your neighbor to get what you want, that's beyond the bounds. That's beyond the bounds. We need to recognize that there are boundaries that God has set, and to go beyond those bounds are wrong. And we have taken some beautiful things that God has given to us as gifts, and we have torn down those boundaries. And we have said, If it makes me happy, I'm doing it. And who is a figment of your imagination to tell me otherwise? Because that's what they think our God is. A figment of our imagination, because they have suppressed it to the point where they do not believe that He is, and therefore they run rampant with this sin. Now, in this country and around the world, this, in my own lifetime, has become a social changing event. I'm telling you, the family is being changed. Society is being changed because men, the human race, has allowed the agenda of the LGBT movement to change what we think is right and wrong and to take up the boundaries and tear them down and put them at the boundaries of the universe. There are no boundaries for them. I'm telling you, God, if He does not judge this country, will have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. And I want you to know that God has judged this country because He's passing by. He has hidden Himself from many in this country. People have even made this issue a litmus test as to whether they will or will not join a church. How do they treat the gays? I want them to accept gays, even though I'm not gay. If not, I'm not going to go to that intolerant church. That intolerant church, I'll not tolerate that. I'm not going to tolerate their intolerance to the gays. No, that has become a litmus test for many, many people. I am just a preacher, and I am just someone that tells you what this book says. But there is a sin in this society that eats like a canker, and it is the unbridled lust of men who have suppressed the truth of God in their hearts. And it comes out in this way. Paul was only trying to give an example of how natural it is to know that men and women go together. Now, once upon a time in my past, I ran a small Christian school, and my wife was one of the kindergarten teachers there. And I can remember her administering a test to students there to see if they were ready to be kindergartners, to see if they were ready to be, in the kindergarten. And you know what kind of test it was? It was, I can't remember it because, but I can tell you a little bit of what my memory serves, and that is they had to match up things with things. Okay, to match up things with things. Now, this is where my memory fails, and this is where I begin to make up things. Okay, but the test goes a little bit like this. If you see a man and a woman, and then they have a little baby over here, and then you see a bull and a cow, then they have a little calf over here, and you see two birds and a nest with an egg. You can't tell the girl from the, unless they're different colors or something, but they usually draw lines. Birds go to egg, bull and cow go to calf, and mom and dad go to baby, and they say, oh, they're beginning to identify normal things and can associate them right. And so you put a piece of wood in front of them that has a square hole, a round hole, and a star hole. And then you give them three objects, and they take the square one, and they start pushing it in the round hole, and they say, maybe next year would be good for you, okay? When you start putting the square peg in the round hole, that type of thing. Well, folks, our society has been teaching us that men with men, now, I don't want to get too graphic here. Do not let your imagination go wild on this. But men with men, I'm telling you, the line should not be there. You should not draw a line that says family, man with man. Well, you know why? Because a woman was made for a man. A woman was made for a man. That's natural. You don't even need the Bible to know that. Even though it says it in here. It says it very clearly. Even nature teaches us that. And so Paul says, even nature, and yet the women with the women and the men with the men, they have gone after their own lust and God gave them up. Reprobate. Now I don't want you to hate these people, okay? Because we don't hate ourselves, do we? You're a sinner. You are. You're a sinner. I don't hate you. I want you to receive the blessings of God. I want them to receive the blessings of God. But I am not going to take their sin and say, it's okay. No. That is not right. It's not right. We need to have a little more backbone in the pulpits from the churches in the United States. I don't want to only hear the Muslims say it. You know what they do with homosexuals? They cut their heads off. And what do? We brag about how many are in the churches so that we can gather more. What? Wait a minute. Well, doesn't God accept us as we are? Do I look frustrated? God says, you as a sinner may claim the righteousness of my Son and come. Don't bring your works. Come as a sinner, claiming Christ. And God will have His Spirit take His truth and retrain your conscience and make your conscience tender again. And He will live in you and provide Himself as an umpire to you, saying, this is wrong and this is right. And He can help you, and you will be sanctified, set apart, and trained by the Spirit of God with the truth of the Bible. And you can be released from that sin if you but love God more than your lust. If you will be someone that says to God, I believe, help thou mine unbelief, God will help. I am a sinner. My flesh is weak. God will help. But if you want to say to God, I know the truth, you'll not find a God who hides. If you think that your conscience is not damaged by sin, you're a fool. You need to have your conscience retrained by the Holy Spirit and the truth of this book. Amen. Now, I would like to say one thing before we end, and that is in verse number 29. Being filled with all unrighteousness. And then he begins to list the different classifications of sin. He used homosexuality as the example. But now he gets into the items that are listed here. But I'm not going to talk about the items. I'm going to talk about this one phrase only. Being filled with all unrighteousness. I want you to recall when he began speaking about the wrath of God being revealed from heaven. In verse number 18, he says this, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. And that's been the topic of this chapter. How men have suppressed. They know the truth, but they hold it down because they're ungodly and they're unrighteous. And notice how he always puts ungodly first and unrighteous second. If you would very quickly go to 2 Peter chapter 2, verse number 6. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that should live ungodly. God destroyed those cities because they were ungodly, and delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them, in seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. The Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptation, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. That is reprobation. If that doesn't send a shiver up your spine, you're dead. Anyone that believes this book has a healthy fear of God. God is a good God. He's a just God. It says in Romans that we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth against them that commit such things. The truth is this. If you give yourself to sin, if you give yourself to the lust of the flesh, God will pass by. You'll pass by. I hope that bothers you. I hope, that pricks your conscience. And that is what I wanted you to see. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.